Burt, why is forgiveness so important? And how does one go about doing it?
Two very good questions. I would like to mention the book I wrote 3 years ago, which just happened to me. And I felt it took over completely. And the one thing that really made an impact on me is the 4 unknown facts. The first fact is that you are unconditional love. That was quite something. And when we begin to understand that you are unconditional love, you begin to see clearly that love is the only thing that works. Love is the only balancer. So the three, I'd like to...
Before you go on,
yeah.
You said the first one is unconditional love, correct?
Right.
Okay, I also noticed in your book that it says favor the word emptiness over anything else. So can you explain why the word emptiness is key to this understanding?
It's key, yeah. Yeah, one of the things that came very clear to me also is that before mentioning that you are unconditional love, if you call it God, then you make it into a religion. If you call it love, then you have a concept about what love is. So anything that you use, any label you use, will not be right. But there is a word that has no concept about it, and it is emptiness. So the first one is called emptiness, the one prevailing truth of all life. And as we go on and listening to both of us, it will become a little clearer and how forgiveness works. Number 2, which is the first one is emptiness. Number 2 is emptiness also. But it relates to all the suffering of humanity. It deals with our fear of emptiness and why we fear it. And we find that once we understand that, then we begin to understand how beautiful the word emptiness is. And then the third one is, how do we achieve this total understanding? Because it is total clarity, and it is through forgiveness. Number 3 of unknown fact of reality is that there is only one way to actually get to the feeling of unconditional love.
Also known as emptiness, right?
Known as emptiness. That through forgiveness. Now, forgiveness is not something you do per se. It is seeing that there is nothing to forgive. You see, maybe you could explain it a little bit better here.
Well, first of all, the word emptiness, looking at the word emptiness as a word to describe unconditional love, or God, or nirvana, or the totality, or fullness, or whatever word people might use. The reason the word emptiness is being used or was given to you in this case is because that's what it is. It's empty.
It's empty.
But there's this incredible fear of realizing that nothing's happening. It's empty. Nothing's going on. There's an incredible fear of that. And so that fear is what prevents us from forgiving, and what holds us in a state of judgment and grievances and suffering. So as we get closer and closer to the truth, we're really, really afraid of this emptiness. But the thing is you have to realize the emptiness. But right after the realization of the emptiness is the realization that it's unconditional love. It's God, it's heaven, it's nirvana. So this fear is the last sort of little barrier that's keeping you from your final realization. This fear of emptiness. It's incredible, but you don't need to be afraid of emptiness, because emptiness is nirvana.
That's beautiful.
It's the end of all suffering, forever.
Yes, That's it. So the 4 unknown facts are emptiness, which is everything, and what we call God, what we call Almighty, what we call just it's the oneness, the oneness. Number two is that when not understood, the emptiness becomes our greatest fear. For example, somebody says, "Oh, I got such an empty feeling in my heart. I feel I'm dying." So the point is that that very emptiness itself that you are feeling as the greatest suffering is itself the release from suffering. And this is where we begin to understand what total forgiveness is like. When there is total forgiveness, then number 4 of the unknown facts of reality is trust. This means that you begin to trust that you are this allness, these 4 facts itself. You are an emptiness itself. You're a totality. Mm-hmm. Now, when I said you're emptiness yourself, maybe you'll know a way of clarifying that.
Your emptiness yourself?
Yeah.
Well, what are the biggest difficulties with realizing the truth of what's happening? Is the fear that we're so afraid of. This word empty just sounds so negative. We're so afraid of it. We're so afraid of the idea of nothing. We're so afraid of the idea that nothing's happening. We're so afraid of the idea that there's not me and then something that contrasts against me. We desperately want to end our suffering, but at the same time we want there to be something. But there isn't something. There's only emptiness. But emptiness isn't this despair, lonely, bleak place. Emptiness is the opposite of that. Everything that wasn't emptiness is a despair, is filled with despair, loneliness, and bleakness. Because everything that's not emptiness implies I'm a human in a body, in a world, and I'm really trapped here. But in emptiness, you're none of that.
That's right.
And not only that, it's not just emptiness. Emptiness is joy. It's peace. It's innocence. There's no you there doing anything, so you can't be guilty.
Total unconditional love.
And
yes.
total love.
Yes.
So there's no need to be afraid of it.
Exactly. So here we begin to understand how to apply forgiveness. Mm-hmm. Now, why does this forgiveness become difficult? See, to make the whole picture a little simpler to understand, is that initially we were all pure being. We lived always. There was never a time when we were born. Life is eternal. However, there came a time, according to all teachings, all scriptures, including Course of Miracles, it's called a mad idea, when the feeling was, what would it be like to be separate? Mm. And that started consciousness. So in the beginning there's pure awareness, then pure awareness became aware of something, which is consciousness. Consciousness then created the world we live in, created the world as we know it, our bodies and everything else was done by consciousness. Consciousness is not fully understood in psychology because they think it stems from the brain. But it is consciousness that created the brain in the first place. So, not to make it complex, to make it simple, is that these four facts completely address the way to forgive. First, there is openness. Emptiness. Secondly, the emptiness itself that we fear is the fullness, but we see it as emptiness. For example, I remember when I was a kid, I was young, I used to feel lonely. And loneliness meant that I am alone from the rest. In other words, separate from the rest. So I was alone, you see. But later on I realized that this loneliness I felt was really oneness itself. I was one with everything. The moment I understood it, I wasn't separate, I was one with. There is no separation. See? And trust, of course, is the one that makes it all work together, come together. So, in the same way, we have forgiveness. Okay, forgiveness works on that same principle we just discussed. You begin to see that because of openness, or not openness, sorry, emptiness, we begin to feel empty, we begin to feel there's something wrong with us. That feeling which emerged when we wanted to be separate, we wanted to be different, created guilt. Guilt is an uneasy feeling that everyone carries until they wake up to their true nature of emptiness. You're always carrying with you. So, to understand what
Four unknown facts of reality is saying?
To understand how to forgive, you have to see clearly that there is a feeling of emptiness inside, feels as that feeling.
Empty.
That empty
guilt.
Feeling, guilt. Okay, sorry about that. And now this feeling of guilt in us is in everyone who hasn't realized that they are unconditional love. And so they still think in terms of being separate. Because in truth, we are all one. We are all one huge being. We are one being. But because of the separation that existed through consciousness, we, being bodies, think that these bodies is all that we are. And so we keep separating. The separation creates automatically this guilt feeling. This guilt is like something is missing, like something is not quite right. It's like an itch you can scratch. You know, it's there always. Forgiveness is so beautiful. Forgiveness takes care of that. Okay? Now, how does it do that? How does forgiveness work to clean us out of that? First, there has to be the seeing that you are carrying guilt. And that guilt could have been, if you don't see it as there, then you find maybe, oh, it's due to my upbringing, or it's due to this, or it's due to that. Ultimately, we'll always find a reason for this feeling of, guilt. But the moment you begin to see that this guilt has no reality in itself, there is that cleansing of that guilt. The moment there is, it falls away. And you become unconditionally loving. So this is how we get back to our true nature as emptiness. You were saying something earlier that made it a little bit easier to understand to people about how when this guilt feeling is seen for what it is, then
yes, okay, I know what you're saying. It's basically if you think you're a human in a body, you've got unconscious guilt. So basically, if you have any sense of discomfort, unhappiness, sadness, worry, disease, anything like that, it means you're not at home and you're not experiencing emptiness, obviously, or you wouldn't be feeling that way. So that means it's time to forgive. And why? And if we don't choose to forgive, it's because we'd rather be separate and suffer. We'd rather choose one of the various options of something over the real reality of nothing or emptiness. And so there's a guilt attached to that.
Once we heal the guilt, everything is healed.
Right.
Amazing things happen.
Especially when we catch them.
Yes, yeah.
And more we catch them being little mini holographic replicas of the idea of separation.
Yes. I worked as a hypnotherapist for close to 30 years, and I've had hundreds of clients. And one thing they all had in common, a guilt feeling. Most of the people didn't know that, but it's an uneasiness. It's a feeling that there's something wrong. See, but once you get in touch with that, see, and then forgive it, see it for what it is and letting go, because all it is a feeling of separation from others. That's how it is. If you feel one with another, we call it love. If you feel one with all others, we call it enlightenment. You see, but that's all that there is, this oneness. So when we feel any form of separation, whatever, we suffer all kinds of dilemmas, physical, mental, spiritual, and emotional. See? By seeing this guilt, getting to the root of it, understanding it, seeing it there, that in itself becomes the healing of it. And that healing is called
forgiveness?
Forgiveness. Right. Forgiveness is miraculous. Forgiveness does not need taking anything for it. Okay? If you have forgiveness in your heart, you have reached the ultimate remedy to all that is wrong in the world, really. Forgiveness is the key. So before we say goodbye here, I just want to make sure that everybody understands how we forgive. Could you give us a hint of how we forgive?
A hint? Well, right back to what I just said. Basically, it starts with recognizing that you're not exactly 100% joyful, followed by the idea that perhaps you're entitled to be 100% joyful. So that first little one is what we call a little willingness to consider the possibility that what's going on isn't quite the way it looks. And so basically that means we're almost acknowledging that we're entitled to feel better. So something in us knows that this is not our natural state. This isn't the way we should be. And so then we're willing to look at what's going on or the situation that we think triggered it in honesty, looking at our own thoughts in relationship to the feeling that we're currently feeling that gives us the idea that we're here as a separate body in a world. We have to look at it with an open mind, open enough to realize that one of the hardest boundaries for a lot of people is the whole idea between duality and non-duality. So forgiveness means you have to be willing to swap over to the non-dual view of things, which means instead of seeing this as me, a separate being, walking around in a world and I'm contained in this, that if I was to really look at my perceptions and my thoughts, the reality is this whole thing is just appearing, including what appears to be my arm and his arm, but that this one's not mine and that's not his. I might feel a sensation or a feeling here that says, hey, that's a feeling in my hand, but that's just kind of relative. So it's basically like Mark Gober's book, Upside Down Thinking. Forgiveness reverses the upside down thinking of the world, or the upside down perception of the world, where where we think we're a separate being, number one, and then everything out there other than me is number two, and that's duality. So forgiveness is seeing that whatever is upsetting us is somehow related to that idea.
Yeah, that's an idea of duality. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, beautiful. Beautiful. Namaste.
Namaste.